The following is a production of The Reporter, Delaware County's leading news source. The Delaware County Democratic Committee held a Meet the Candidates event in Hamden on Saturday, July 30th. Candidates Josh Riley and Jamie Cheney are competing in the August 23rd Democratic primary for the 19th Congressional District. The successful candidate will face Republican candidate Mark Molinaro in November's general election.
Hello, everybody. I'm Kathleen Hayek. I'm chair of the Delaware County Democratic Committee, and I want to welcome all of you here today on this bright and beautiful Saturday morning. It's lovely to see all your faces. I want to introduce, first our candidates that we are going to be grilling here today. First is Josh Riley.
Thanks for being here.
And on my right is Jamie Cheney. I'm very, very, very proud to be introducing these two people because they are the strongest candidates I've come across in a long, long time. And my decision is very, very difficult. And I know yours will be too. So please listen carefully, ask all the questions you want to ask. They've got good answers. So. And I also want to introduce the two moderators. We have Sue Dapkins, who is chair of our narrative committee, and Anthony White, who is chair of our Hamden committee. And also I want to recognize we have a visiting chair from another county, and there he is, Mike. Oh God, Mike, I can't say it. Mike Moniscalchi from Rensselaer, and he's also our regional vice chair for the Democratic Rural Caucus as part of the state party. So I'm very pleased that he took time to be with us today. And also, I would like all of our DC members to raise your hand. Just everybody, these are the people who put this thing together. These are the people, these are your representatives in your town, and so please reach out to them whenever you've got questions about the Democratic Party. We like to talk to you, and we'd like you to talk to us, and not just about us. Talk to us. Okay, and without further ado, I'm going to get this party started. Sue and Anthony, take over.
Hello? Am I? Okay. Hi, I'm Anthony White, and Kathleen just introduced me. If anyone doesn't know me, Town Chair of Hamden, and we're going to get things started. We have two great candidates, as Kathleen mentioned, and I checked the rules. We can only send one of them to win against Molinaro. So we have some questions we're going to ask to get things started. We're going to encourage follow-ups. Raise your hand. And if the candidates don't ask the question the way you want it to be answered, or you have more questions, just raise your hand, participate. We'd like to be more like a conversation. And we'll also be taking questions directly from the audience. So please participate. This is your chance to get to know them and make a decision. We're having on August 23rd, I think everyone here knows this, but on August 23rd, we have two elections. One is for Pat Ryan, so that he will officially represent us for the rest of the term, and we have a primary to elect one of these two fine people to represent us for the November election. So it's important that everyone knows that you've got to vote. It's going to be a low turnout election, and Delaware County has a chance to make a difference. So you have anything to add?
I think you did fine.
All right.
One other thing, if you're confused about your state and assembly districts, and there's a great deal of confusion out there, please see maps. Lisa Tate has made maps of the current districts, so go check it out, or go to our website, because it's all laid out for you if you have any confusion about your state districts.
And what is the website?
DCNYDems.org. Thank you,
Everybody
Kim.
got that?
DCNYDems.org.
I'll say that for the mic, dcnydems.org. It is a fantastic website. It is a work in progress, and it's just getting better. If you haven't checked it out already, check it out, because we've been doing a lot of work on it. We're really proud of it. All right, so I'm going to start by asking a question, and I don't So other than saying, elect me and I'll make things great, like more specifics, because here in Delaware County, Sue and I were discussing this, most people, they are small business owners or they work for a small business. We don't have big businesses here. We have some agriculture, but it's not like it was a generation ago. So I'll just start with you, Janie, and then you, Josh. What will you do to help this region of our big, huge new district? What can you do to help the economy? And I'll leave it a nice general question so we can have lots of follow-up.
Well, thank you so much for having me this morning. Thank you for a extremely well-organized event. Thank you for some fabulous Saturday morning turnout. And I have to say that I am particularly excited about Delaware County in the context of this new district because you're the bridge. Literally, when you look at the map of our giant district, Delaware County is the uniting central point. So when you ask a really, really simple opening question like, what about the economy? It makes sense that we just start to think about how we answer it here in Delaware County. And I think what's really interesting to me is that when you look at this district, there's a lot of focus on the west with our two largest population centers. And then there's a lot of focus on the east with the Hudson Valley, it being at sort of the edge of the New York City radius, picking up a lot of hospitality business. But you drive to such an interesting question. What about our deeply, deeply rural areas? I don't want to get too much into my background, but I'm someone who has built businesses, multiple businesses, in deeply, deeply rural areas, and it's different. All of the things that we might do to stimulate business on a nationwide level or a statewide level come with a lot of asterisks and a lot of exceptions here, starting with the fact that we have a lot of small business tools that are phenomenal if you have great access to broadband, consistent access to cellular. So the first thing we need to do is we need to look at the infrastructure in Delaware County and make sure that we're giving people even an even playing field to play on. And I know that that's something that we experience on a regular basis with our small business, where very often, we work through apps to talk about how we refill beef in a retail freezer. There are areas where we'll be out in a field and we simply won't get a signal for 2 or 3 hours, and someone will call us and say, we reached out to you 2 hours ago to refill it. How are we addressing something like that? The other thing, though, I think we need to look at is there's a lot of, I am really, really excited, as I think everyone probably is, about the CHIPS Act and investments we're going to see in technology, in job training. I think a lot of these are going to come to NY19, but here's the thing. They can't just come over to Ulster County, and it can't just come over to Broome County or to Tompkins County. And we can't say, hey, if someone's willing to commute down here, they're gonna have access to that training. Because the reality is those commutes are long and they don't work. We need to talk about what we're going to do to bring the training programs and the jobs into areas like this. I am a huge, huge fan of Delgado's Gateway to Careers bill. For those of you who aren't familiar with this, this was proposed in February of this year. And what this looks at is the fact that, particularly in an area like this, it's not just about setting up a training program. It's about making sure that people can get to that training program, that there's childcare near the training program. It's what we call wraparound services, which have traditionally been a concept in social services, but it's taking it into job and business development. So saying to someone, if we take some of the technology investment that we're going to make in Broome, and we're going to put a training program into place at SUNY Delhi, is there childcare on site? Are we providing some kind of point-to-point van transportation for people to get there? So I think that looking at wraparound career services, wraparound career training services, but as they pertain to rural areas, not a voucher for public transit. Public transit doesn't exist. A system of some sort, and a system that considers what it is to go to a career development program in this area. So my two priorities in terms of thinking about how the economy looks in Delaware County are going to be two things. Comprehensive investment in broadband and cellular infrastructure, and wraparound career training programs that reach up into the communities in the middle of this district rather than requiring people to travel away from this area for job training.
Thank you all for coming out on a Saturday morning. What a beautiful place to spend a Saturday morning. I was promised a push on the swing after this as my reward, and I'm going to hold everybody to that. My feet actually drag along real bad. It's not as great as it sounds. No, it's so good to be with all of you. I just very briefly want to give my background. I grew up in Endicott, New York, which is just outside of Binghamton. As a kid, I grew up coming up to Delhi. My great aunt Aussie lived there, and what I remember from it was that she had the best sugar cookie recipes in the world, and there's the recipe's still in the family. And I remember being a little kid and going up to Delhi and loading up on sugar cookies. And then the other thing I remember, she had a huge yard, so they would get us all on a sugar high and send the kids out to run around forever, which I think is the way to do it. My background is pretty typical upstate New York story. My folks have been in the area for over 100 years. They came here to work in the factories. We had a shoe factory in Endicott for a while and IBM for a long time. And my folks worked there. Dad was a maintenance worker in the waste treatment plant. And as I was growing up, what I saw was a lot of those jobs go away. A lot of people dealing with job loss, struggling to make ends meet. The opioid epidemic came into the community. And meanwhile, at the same time, you saw Wall Street profits soaring. So these jobs were shipped overseas, and it was terrible for upstate New Yorkers who were sold out and left behind. But it was really great for the Wall Street investment banks and hedge funds. And that always stuck with me as a manifest injustice in our economy. And so I spent a lot of my career fighting back. My first job out of law school, I took a case partnering with the American Academy of Pediatrics, representing kids from low-income families who were having trouble getting healthcare services, and argued then and still believe that healthcare in this country should be a civil right for folks, not a source of huge corporate profits, and something that bankrupts so many families. I worked at the U.S. Department of Labor, where I focused on job training programs and unemployment programs for communities and neighborhoods like the one that I grew up in. And I worked for a few years as an attorney in the United States Senate, where I brought Democrats and Republicans together to get legislation passed in a very divided environment, including legislation to secure funding to fight the opioid epidemic that had really ripped apart so many communities here. I'm running for Congress in large part exactly because of this issue, the economy. The first thing we need to do, I believe, as Democrats, and this isn't always the most popular thing to say among Democrats, is we have to be honest that so many working families right now are really, really struggling to get by. The talking points that come out of the Democratic establishment in Washington, D.C. about the economy doing so well and all of those talking points, they don't reflect the reality that so many families are facing at their kitchen tables in upstate New York right now. So the first thing we need to do is understand that families are really struggling to get by. What do we do about it? There's a handful of things. Number one, this job, to be successful in this job, you have to be really hyper-focused on local issues. One of the first meetings I had after redistricting, I heard about the water treatment infrastructure in Walton is basically at capacity. And that's a big economic development issue because it means small businesses can't expand and new businesses can't come in because they don't have access to that. There's a provision in the recently enacted infrastructure law that would provide funding for exactly those sorts of projects. So one of the things we need to do is drive some of that infrastructure money into water treatment infrastructure in places like Walton. The work that Amphenol is doing is cutting edge and creates lots of good jobs. I see a lot of opportunities for us to continue to innovate and create jobs there. The workforce training issues, the workforce supply issues, I'm hearing about those across this entire district. Workers just can't, or small businesses and companies that are trying to expand can't find access to the skilled workforce that they need. There's a huge opportunity coming up with the Workforce Investment Act that's going to be reauthorized in the next Congress. And it's a great opportunity for us to partner our small businesses and our entrepreneurs with apprenticeship programs through our unions or through community colleges. So we have to be hyper focused on local issues and driving federal resources here so that we can stay on the front edge and get on the front edge of innovation and creating those jobs.
Any follow-up? Any questions from the audience on the topic? If not, we'll move on. In keeping with the subject of the economy, I did want to talk about the ag economy in Delaware County. Jamie did reference her understanding of some of the issues that farmers face if the broadband service isn't adequate. Delaware County has a long history of an ag-based economy. With the decline of the dairy industry, that's changing. Young farmers face huge challenges buying or leasing land and getting product to market. What are the steps that could be taken to support agriculture in CD19, and what do you see as the opportunities? Jamie?
Do you want to switch?
And usually we switch.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go for it, yes.
Great. So first thing, I am going to ask to be on the Ag Committee after I'm elected, because there's a huge opportunity coming up with the reauthorization of the Farm Bill to structure federal ag policy to meet the needs of upstate New York. Some of the things I've been hearing about that are on the ground that are most critical, especially the dairy industry, our immigration system is totally broken, and so it has made it very difficult for a lot of farmers to get access to the labor they need. When I worked on the Senate Judiciary Committee, one of the things I worked on was immigration reform so that our visas for ag workers could be year-round instead of seasonal, because people in Washington don't seem to get that you have to milk the cows year-round. So otherwise they get really grumpy. So we have to fix our immigration system, make sure people have access to the labor they need. The reimbursement rates for cover crops and other supports that should be coming to our farmers are just not cutting it right now. We're in a situation right now in this country where we're giving massive tax breaks to hedge fund managers and corporations that are shipping jobs overseas, and you're telling me we can't afford to raise the reimbursement rate for cover crops for farmers? We can't afford to provide the price supports that folks need? I think that's the wrong choice, and our priorities are wrong. And then the last thing I'll say on this, and I think this is actually the number one issue here, we have seen in the last generation massive consolidation in every industry, but especially in agriculture. In about the last 30 years, we've gone from a situation where the 4 top places to get your product into market have gone from about 40% market share to 80% market share. That is terrible for our dairy farmers because they can't get their product into market. They don't have choices. It's terrible for consumers because they don't have the competition to keep prices down. But it's really, really, really good for the big ag monopolies that are buying politicians and flooding our politics with money and trying to keep it that way. So one of the things I'm going to do when I go to Washington is fight like hell to break up those monopolies, because that's where this all starts.
There's a little height difference here then. It'll be an ongoing joke on the campaign trail. So let's talk about ag. I definitely have some fairly strong feelings about this. For those of you who don't know, my husband and I run a beef farm over in the Hudson Valley. So unfortunately, dairy, we've, I think, lost over 80% of our dairy farms in New York State. The reality is that dairy farms actually, immigrant labor isn't so much the issue, it's how milk products have been subsidized out west. As Josh alluded to, the Farm Bill is going to be reauthorized. So the challenge has been that voices on the Ag Committee have largely been from those companies that can afford to have lobbyists. And let me tell you who cannot afford to have lobbyists. Farmers here, farmers in the Hudson Valley, farmers in Broome County, family farms across our country. So all of our supports for the agricultural industry have been designed for giant corporate ag. I will be a small farm voice on the Ag Committee. I will be a small farm voice that knows very, very well exactly what it takes to run a farm or to grow a farm in the Hudson Valley or the Southern Tier. One of the biggest issues that we're running into is that with the decline of dairy, There is available agricultural land, but a lot of it has been conserved without a requirement in place that it be actively farmed. It's effectively been conserved for people's view sheds. So one specific piece of legislation we're going to need to pass is to disincentivize open land conservation in agricultural areas that does not require some element of farming. We've effectively taken farmland off of the open market. The second thing that we need to do, and this is because farm policy has been so driven by big ag, it's largely been done through tax credits. So if you're a giant ag company and you're gonna have a tax bill due at the end of the year, you're happy to negotiate for all those tax credits possible. To say if you invest in X more efficient equipment, you're gonna take the tax credit at the end of the year. Guess who that doesn't help? A farmer here who maybe is losing money at the end of the year or getting to zero in a good year. The reality is, those farmers don't have much of a tax bill because they're not making any money. Even if they were to use that program, they can't take the tax credit. And this brings me to another problem. So maybe I'm a farmer here in the Hudson Valley, here in the Southern Tier, here in Delaware County, and I want to go buy a new tractor. And there's a tax credit out there that's going to allow me to do it. But I'm just going to need to borrow that money up front. Where am I going to go do that? What kind of financial services, what kind of lending are we providing to our farmers, some of whom have very little credit? So there's two things we need to do to address this specifically. One, we need to switch to grant funding for farms under a certain size, which is the vast majority of farms in this district. Secondly, we need to make access to financial capital easy for these farmers. We have an amazing resource here in New York State. I am so deeply proud of the Cornell cooperative system. If you're not familiar, this is present in every county in our district. It means that we have educators on the ground who are generally very trusted members of the ag community. It is a system that we could lean on in terms of distributing financial resources and allowing farmers to apply for credit, but it is incredibly underfunded. This is my community. I know so many of these educators myself. Every single one of them tells me they could do their job 2 or 3 times over with the number of farmers who are saying, can you please come and sit with me and talk me through the funding programs that I can apply for? We need to better fund a program like that if we are serious about having a regional food supply going forward. So I will be a New York voice, a small farm voice, a Southern Tier voice, a Hudson Valley voice, and a Delaware County voice on the Ag Committee to pass policy that can be used by farmers here, not big giant farmers who can afford lobbyists.
We're going to come back to economy. This is, yes, I said, I was telling Sue, Sue and I are going to be mumbling to each other, so don't think we're being rude. We're going to come back to economy because there's a lot of stuff that was brought up, and I've got some follow-up questions. But I'd like to move on to, which we just mentioned, education. And I know there's some people out here that might want some follow with that, but going to college is expensive. The economy is changing, and I'm going to go ahead and read the question as is. We know people had to drop out of college because of finances, the max federal grants have not kept up with costs. How would you support those who want to attend college and can't afford it? And what is your position on canceling student debt? And I don't know which take.
We got that. We're good.
Yeah, okay.
We've gotten really good at alternating answers over the past few months. So how would we support those who want to attend college and not afford it? I am a huge fan of making a portion of community college free, particularly for those who attend a college in their communities and choose to stay in their communities. And this ties directly into my answer on student debt. I'm hearing that you want to talk about the economy. And what generally is going on in our economy is it's very unbalanced in so many ways, from those at the top profiting while those at the bottom are working 2, 3, frankly we hear more, 4 jobs to make ends meet, from areas that have demand but frankly don't have a labor force. We need to think about how we can address these economic issues while balancing out some of these things. So for example, If we have a high school student in this area who wants to attend a specific program, I want to make that happen for them. But I also want to make sure that ideally their skills that they develop then stay within our area. So I imagine offering some kind of free community college tuition if you keep your skills within a certain area. I also would like to use that to think about how we address student debt. Student debt is a crisis. It's about to cripple a generation, but it's also an opportunity. I know that, and I'm sure we'll both talk about this, we hear so many stories of specific industries or professions in different places in our district that simply cannot hire. And this goes from service workers to the need for medical professionals in our more rural areas. We can use how we address student debt to address how we move labor across our workforce. There's a lot of programs in our country that have offered incentives to spend a year doing something. What if we offer a student debt alleviation incentive to come and work in a certain industry in a rural area? What if we use this to rebalance our workforce? So I am in support of student debt forgiveness when it is associated with moving labor into an area of economic need. I see this as a way to move younger talent right to the small businesses of Delaware County. I see this as a way to say to a student somewhere in our district, we'd love for you to attend that job training program at your community college that we're going to fund out of the CHIPS Act, and we're really, really excited about. But we want you to stay either within New York State or within this district and bring those skills and build your business here. So I think we need to look at these two huge challenges as opportunities.
So this is personal for me in a lot of ways. I couldn't have gone to college without the benefit of federal aid programs and student loans. We couldn't have afforded it. I was able to go to college because of savings from my newspaper route and a bunch of federal help. When I graduated from school, I had well over 6 figures in debt. So my view is that we need to help people who are getting an education at high cost to themselves in a couple of ways. Number one, right now, just like everything in this economy, everything's driven by profit interests on Wall Street. So instead of having federal loan programs that are robust enough and federal grant programs that are robust enough for folks from middle class, working class, low-income families to go to school, we've handed the whole thing over to Wall Street for them to make a profit off of. So I want to see us invest federally in more student aid programs so that we're helping more people get into the middle class and get the education they need to do that. More fundamentally here though, I think there's a real issue with the premise of the question because this keeps coming up everywhere and rightfully so, but we need to take a step back and think about what the real issue is here. We've gotten to a place in this country where getting a 4-year college degree in a lot of places is a prerequisite to getting into the middle class. I think that's a problem. For generations in upstate New York, people have been able to earn a really good, strong middle class life without a college education. That's what my dad did. He went from high school straight into the factory. That's what his dad did. Went straight from the army into the factory and had really good jobs where you could work with your hands and get ahead and provide for your family. And we've gotten so far away from that as a country. So one of my top priorities when the Workforce Investment Act comes up for reauthorization next year, one of my top priorities is going to be to make sure we're funding our apprenticeship programs and our career and technical education programs through our unions so that people can get a place in the middle class even if they don't have a college degree. My dad, when the factories started closing down and there were a lot of layoffs in the late 90s, early 2000s, he had never gone to college. And he saw the writing on the wall that those jobs were going to go away. And he decided to do something about it and asked his manager to go on the 3rd shift at the factory. That's the graveyard shift where you work overnight, so that he could come home in the morning, get a bite to eat, grab a quick shower, and then he drove out to Delhi to take landscape architecture classes because you can't ship those jobs overseas. And it's true. And he said, you know, it's been an inspiration for me because it reminds me when we face adversity, we do something about it. And what he did about it when he saw Wall Street selling us out and shipping our jobs overseas, instead of curling up in a ball and saying, woe is me, he said, you know what, I'm gonna do the really hard thing this point in my life and go get that degree at Delhi. And it took him 4 years to get his 2-year degree. I joke because he got his college degree 1 year after I did. But I've never been so proud of anybody for doing that because I think it was really hard and took a lot of courage for him to do that. We need more of those opportunities to be more readily available for folks across upstate New York, going and getting the 2-year degrees, doing the vocational programs, doing the CTE programs, doing the apprenticeship programs. So yes, let's invest to make sure folks aren't being crushed with college debt for their 4-year degrees or professional degrees, but let's also not put people to the choice that it's either that or nothing.
Can I have a follow-up?
Yeah, of course.
What I would like to know is clarification of two points. Both of you mentioned about really excellent educations at fine universities, yet both of you are talking about sending our children, the children of Delaware County, to trade school. And so I would like some clarification because I still happen to think that education, for the sake of education, is an important part of this. The second thing is, we have a generation, a large generation, that has been left out of the economic opportunities in this country because of student debt. And this is, I mean, it's just shameful, the way these kids, they're home, they can't buy houses, they can't start families, there are huge numbers of things. And then, to top it off, we're taking the environment away from them. I mean, we're causing huge problems in the environment for their future. So what are you going to do about that?
Carla, what is your question?
So my question, I want clarification on both of those things.
Yeah.
Of sending kids from Delaware County to trade school.
Uh-huh.
And then also, what are you going to do about this generation?
Yeah.
With student debt?
Yeah. Yeah, so I'll take those in reverse order. So on the student debt issue, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. We got to take the profit. Making sure folks are educated shouldn't be a source of profits for Wall Street. It should be something we are investing in each other and as a people. So what I want to see is the federal government take more of a role in providing zero interest or very, very low interest student loans and tons of grants. Our Pell Grant system right now is badly underfunded, so we should be investing more to make sure folks aren't leaving with these huge debts. I also think that if you're going into a public service profession, so for example, folks who are going to be public defenders or folks who are going to be nurses, they should have, public school teachers like my sister, they should have their student loans taken care of because they're providing a public service for us. So I couldn't agree more with you. The debt issue, it's crushing working families and it's benefiting Wall Street, and that's unfair and it's got to change. With respect to education generally, we've also very badly underfunded our elementary and secondary education system in this country. There's a lot more we should be doing to invest in our teachers. There's a lot more we should be doing to invest in our schools, including the infrastructure in our schools. And what I want to see happen is a situation where kids who are getting I'm a very, very, very proud product of upstate New York's public schools. I went to Union Endicott High School, came up through the public schools. As far as I know, I'm the only candidate who can say that. I'm very, very proud of our public schools. And what I would like to see is kids have that education, that nurturing environment, and then have the choice, not be forced. I'm sick of this situation where kids feel like I have to go to a 4-year school or else I'm a failure. Like that is just so wrong. We should be giving those kids an opportunity to do whatever it is that they want to do to succeed in life. If that's a vocational program, if it's a 2-year degree, if it's an apprenticeship with our unions, if it's a 4-year degree, fine. But what we're doing right now is we're underfunding our elementary and secondary education system, and then we're funneling kids into 6 figures of student debt where they're getting crushed by Wall Street. So we have to substantially fund those investments and take the profit interest out of the whole thing.
So I'm going to take those very, very tough questions in the same order. The level of our Pell Grant funding has not been revisited in decades. We need to be looking at grants. End of conversation. This isn't about loans. It needs to be looking at grants. I am in favor of student debt relief up to $10,000 across the board at this point. I think that there's a group, a generation that is simply, they've not had an opportunity in this economy. And I believe that we need to set a benchmark. $10,000 to give people a jump start back in, and then actively looking for various places. Josh alluded to public service, but I see this across the board. So whether it's going into medical professions where we desperately need more people coming to work in rural areas, we need to incentivize these things through extended opportunities for student debt relief. But I want to touch on your other question, because I think this is a really, really good question. Why are we talking so much about trade school and vocational school and two-year college? I actually think you asked a great and ironic question, which is that there has been this perception in this country that the road is to four-year college and you must do that. I think there's two pieces of work we need to do. We do need to show opportunities that are something other than that. And the reason I bring that up is this. Right when we launched this campaign, I went to leaders in a number of small towns across the district, and I said, what's the biggest issue in your town? And as you can imagine, there were many, many things, ranging from housing to opioid use to water infrastructure. But one that came up a couple times, and I thought this was interesting, came up in 3 different towns, was someone said, I literally don't know where I'm going to hire my next building inspector. And a building inspector is a good middle-class job, and in every single one, as we talked a little bit, they said, the person currently working in this role is 60 plus, and I don't see someone in my community with the skill set or the desire to take on that role. And again, a great middle-class job and a great stable future for a family. The reality is we have simply undersupplied an area of our economy, particularly here in a region that has traditionally had a very, very strong base of highly skilled trades. So I bring that up because I think there's huge opportunities there, and we need to remind people that, frankly, there's a lot of places where after 2 years of training, you can be in a great middle class position that you may be chasing for years if you choose certain paths out of a 4-year degree program. The other thing though, and this is something that you alluded to, are we telling the children of Delaware County that here are some 2-year programs you can go to? No, that's not okay. We need to be doing everything we can to bring opportunities and exposure into Delaware and bring our students into the wider world. It's something I see an opportunity within this district where we have excellent educational institutions across the district. So if we have a high school student here who wants to learn about something that Cornell is offering a course in, but frankly, how are they going to get there? How are they possibly going to be exposed to that? These kind of interactions of educational opportunities are things that we need to be proactively looking to create and looking to fund. I don't think it's realistic to expect someone who is sitting in a classroom here to go out and create the opportunity for themselves. I think we need to create pathways across New York State and across this district to say to a student, the 19th district is an amazing place. Here are 3 opportunities where we can provide wraparound services, i.e. transport, for you, super motivated high school student, to go learn about the green energy investment that's going on at Cornell and think about whether it makes sense for you to possibly pursue a degree in that. And we should be actively funding programs like that. You alluded to the environment. Let's talk about it. It breaks my heart. Of the decisions that came down at the end of June, and I think a lot of you probably have heard my own personal feelings, experience on choice, happy to talk about it at length. Even in that context, it was the EPA decision that at least personally rocked me in the deepest way. Because it says that we are willing to throw away the future of our children for corporate profits today. That doesn't work. This needs to be an absolute priority. Regulating companies, regulating emissions needs to be a priority. If our courts aren't going to do it, it needs to be legislation that we get on the floor immediately, and it is well funded to allow states and the federal government to fund emissions. The court's decision terrifies me. I'm optimistic about what comes out of reconciliation, but the fact that we haven't gotten a climate bill through this year, to me it says we need to do more. We need louder, stronger, democratic voices who aren't going to make horse trades over the fate of our children. It's not fair.
Are there any more questions related to education?
We've come to climate change. What specific legislation do you think would have the most impact in slowing climate change? And how would you bring green jobs to Delaware County?
Yeah, so on the first one, there's actually a provision. One of the things I'm most excited about, I think the huge existential threat we're seeing with climate change, it's something I think about all the time as the father of a 2-year-old, it's a huge, huge challenge. We also need to look at it as a massive opportunity, particularly for communities across upstate New York. So anytime I talk about climate and the environment, we also need to be talking about jobs and the economy. So let me give you one specific example. In the recently enacted bipartisan infrastructure law, there's a brand new provision in there. It's being run out of the Commerce Department. It's called the Battery Material Processing Program, which sounds technical and wonky, and it kind of is. But here's what it does. It's going to invest in clean energy storage so that we can get access to solar energy when the sun's not shining. We can get access to wind when the wind's not blowing. And why that's so exciting is because we in upstate New York are in a position to be on the forefront of that innovation. There are incredible, incredible technologies coming out of our SUNY system right now that have won awards across the world for exactly this sort of technology. We also have the infrastructure. There's a lot of old manufacturing facilities here that can be repurposed to do this. And we also have the workforce. I think upstate New Yorkers can outwork anybody as long as we're on a level playing field. So we have the intellectual property, we have the infrastructure, sort of, we have to invest a little more in it, and we have the workforce that's ready to do the job. And now you have this very specific provision out of federal law that's being run out of the Commerce Department that if we can get it into this community, it's going to kickstart those jobs. There's tons of other examples. I mean, we could have an entire forum about the very specific projects across this region. There's another that I was just talking to some folks with about manufacturing solar panels right here in the United States and right here in upstate New York. Instead of ceding all of that to China, we should be doing that here. So, I'm so proud of this region's industrial past. My family worked in these plants for 100 years, and what I tell people is I'm so proud of that because we always made things the world needed to address its biggest challenges. When we went to the world wars to fight fascism, we were making the boots that the soldiers were wearing here in upstate New York. When the Social Security Administration had to get up and running, and it was this huge technological challenge, we made the punch cards and all of that technology here in upstate New York. We're the reason the Social Security Administration was able to get up and running. We're the reason fascism was defeated in Europe. We are on the forefront of building circuit boards in the technology revolution. We did that here in upstate New York. Here, we should be proud of that. We should be proud of the fact that we've always been on the forefront of innovation. And right now, we're in a situation where, once again, the world is facing massive, massive challenges. And climate change is going to kill us if we don't get our act together. That's true. But it's also true that we have an amazing opportunity to do what we do in upstate New York, which is get on the forefront and make the things we need to save the planet. And so those sorts of programs, that type of legislation out of Washington, it's not hypothetical, it's real. And if we can bring it home, we can start doing that stuff here.
So I'm going to take the initial question in two parts, which is what do we think would be the most, was impactful in terms of addressing climate change? And then, can you just remind me exactly the wording of the second part of the question?
The second part of your question had to do with how would you bring green jobs to Delaware?
Great. Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so first part of the question, as I alluded to, I think that the EPA decision is the single biggest threat to climate. So we need a new version probably of the Clean Air Act. We need legislation that steps in where our judicial branch just fell down. And we need that in the next Congress, no question. I also, and this will be my bridge between the two questions, the Green Jobs Act did a great job of not just saying, we just kind of generally need to move towards a green economy, but it said, okay, we need to define what this economy looks like in 2050 that is truly sustainable. And then we need to roadmap to get there. And then we need to be accountable every single quarter. So what this meant was it put in place a commission that had, importantly, members of our labor workforce, which have traditionally been more hesitant about some of the job transitions, yet want to partner. So a commission that had both career development experts, members of our labor workforce, technology experts, climate experts. We built that commission. That commission meets once every quarter to make sure that we are doing two things on a quarterly basis now through 2050, as crazy as that sounds. Decreasing emissions and shifting our jobs in the direction that supports the 2050 economy. There's going to be some really hard questions around that. That's going to mean that there may be a sector of jobs that ultimately is going to disappear. But if we're looking at the 30-year roadmap to that sector disappearing, and we're looking at mapping in retraining, as opposed to having a piece of our workforce fall off a cliff, we have a slow ramp where we're creating opportunities and funding for retraining. I think that thinking in a really smart way around this is incredibly important. But more important than that is legislating where the judicial branch just fell very, very short. The other point that I want to make quickly is that I'm really excited about the battery work that we're doing down near Binghamton, but that needs to come here. And or, at a minimum, we need to look at the wraparound services that would allow people to access that training and those jobs. It is not enough for it to come to the 19th district. It needs to come into every single county in the 19th district, because someone who, I'm just going to paint a picture, is a single mother with 2 children, how is she going to get to that training? At a minimum, we need to put nearby and we need to offer childcare. I, as a bit of background, have spent a career bringing together people who didn't think they belonged at a table together. I saw a problem where large financial services companies traditionally push parents out of their workforce because they weren't willing to be flexible. So I didn't go and I yell at those companies and say, time for you to be flexible. They weren't really going to listen to me. I built business cases that showed how if they put flexibility and invest in that, over time, their cost of employee turnover would come down. And frankly, they looked at the business cases, that this is really interesting. We sat around conference tables, we mapped out flexibility programs. Now we have them in some of the biggest firms across Wall Street. This is the work that I think the 19th can be a leader on in terms of climate change. I am struck every single day by how connected everyone in this district is to our sense of physical place. Whether that's the fact that we live in a deeply, deeply rural area where we are surrounded by an active agricultural economy and open space, whether it's the ski resorts in the Catskills, which drive whole economies, and were decimated this past winter. But we use really different words on either side of the aisle. We just talked about the fact that I think, what did we compare? We said good soil and good dirt. Those are words we'll hear among farmers. Hey, that place over there, that's got really good dirt. What does good dirt mean? It means it's well aerated. It means it has a steady but not overwhelming source of rain. These are the things our farmers want and our ag community wants. But let me tell you, they're never using the word climate. It's rather infamous, particularly in the Hudson Valley, a little bit less so in the southern tier, that 2 years ago we only got 1 cut of hay. It decimated our family farms because we had too much rain in August. We all want weather stability. We all want climate stability. This is a district that can bring people to the table together and become a national example of how to do that. And what I mean is by taking someone who may frankly have a Trump sign on the side of their barn over there, but he wants to make sure that he's gonna get 2 cuts of hay every single summer going forward. And sitting together and being part of a 19th District Climate Workforce Development Task Force, where we think collaboratively, because we all want the same thing. We want weather stability, and I think a piece of the work we need to do in this district is not defaulting to the word climate. I don't know how it became so politicized. I think good dirt, good air, consistent rain, less rain, 2 cuts of hay every summer, those are words we can align on, and somehow we've pushed each other away from the table, where in this district I'm struck by how much we do all want to be at the same table. So that was a long answer, but I think there's a lot we can do in this district.
You have a question? Could you state your name and where you're from?
Okay, my name is Lou Gilson, and I live right here in Hampton. Now, if elected to Congress, you're going to be dealing with some matters that have little, if anything, to do with Delaware County or New York 19. I would like to know your understanding of and position regarding the sovereignty of Native nations and Indian treaty rights. Thank you.
I think that's an excellent question, and thank you for bringing it up. The reality is we can talk all we want about the ag industry right here, but so many of the things we'd be asked to think about and weigh in on are not related to the conversation that we just had. I'm going to stand here and say I'm very, very proud that there's a couple things I'm an expert on. One is local farm policy. 2 is flexibility and incorporating working parents into the workforce. I am not an expert on this legal area, so my gut is that we need to do more, but more, I think I need to sit with you or whatever experts you can help me identify as a member of Congress and listen. Listen to where we're falling short, where we need to do more, and where what's on the table simply isn't creative enough or addressing enough of a community that we traditionally have not supported. So I'm very, if anyone stands up here and tells you they're an expert in every policy area today, listen, that's awesome, good for them. I'm very open that there are certain areas where I'm not gonna say I am, but that I need to listen and learn more. My gut is that we need to do more to protect sovereign rights, but also to pull Native American populations as a whole back into our economy and our community. So say, not only how are we protecting your rights today, but how can we make sure our Native American communities who've traditionally been sidelined have an opportunity to have access to a job training program or an educational program in a way that we may not be thinking of. And this goes to, I spoke a lot about wraparound services and making sure that things are accessible to people in the space in which they live. We can say this works here in Delaware County today. How does this work for a Native American population who may have had a totally different experience? How are we opening up our economy and our educational system? So if confronted with exactly this question, what I would say is, can you help me find a group to sit and educate me on this issue? And that's what I think the job of a representative is, to say, I'm not an expert on everything, but I need to be open to being educated on these views and understanding what the needs are of a certain group and how we can best advocate for them.
Thanks. What'd you say your name was again?
Lou Gilson.
Lou, thanks for the question, Lou. So I'll tell you my view on this, and you'll tell me what I get wrong. I think right now our Native American communities are getting the worst of both worlds when it comes to sovereignty and jurisdiction. Their sovereignty and jurisdiction is being encroached upon unnecessarily on the one hand, and yet on the other hand, our federal government is not doing anything to invest in those communities. So one example I can offer, when I was as a lawyer in the U.S. Senate, we worked on the Violence Against Women Reauthorization Bill, and one of the huge issues that came up in the course of negotiating that bill was how are we providing funding to law enforcement in Indian country to make sure they have the resources that they need, while still respecting their sovereignty and legal jurisdiction. there are poverty rates that are through the roof. There were a ton of issues around addiction issues and substance abuse issues, the sorts of things that happen when communities are not supported, when we're not putting resources into the educational system. And then on the other hand, disregarding the jurisdictional limits and the sovereignty of those nations. So we're basically getting it exactly backwards right now. We're compromising jurisdiction and sovereignty, and we're not investing in folks, which is a complete opposite. We should be both investing in those communities to make sure we're lifting people out of poverty and also respecting the jurisdictional limits that we agreed, frankly, hundreds of years ago would be respected. So our policy right now is just completely turned on its head and completely backwards, as far as I see it. You look like you were going to say something.
No,
Yeah.
I'm not going to say anything. I'm here to, I asked a question to get your understanding and position on these two items.
Yeah, good.
Thank you. We've alluded to this, the candidates have, the issue of money in politics. Big money is a major player in elections. I think we all know that. Corporations are people, per Citizens United decision. Big tech, big pharma, big fossil fuels have outsized influence. There's a revolving door as elected officials become lobbyists. Dark money seems to control Congress, with lobbyists writing bills to benefit their industries. How would you combat the overwhelming influence of money in politics?
So this is probably the most important question, because the money in politics is the root of all evil. You name a problem that we have in this country, it's traced back to this. The reason we can't get meaningful gun violence prevention done is because the NRA is pumping tons of money into our politics, pumping money into Mark Molinaro's campaign to send him down to Washington and do their bidding instead of yours. The pharmaceutical industry spent $14 million in the last election cycle buying politicians, shipped them down to Washington, spent $300 million lobbying them, and is it any wonder we can't lower the cost of prescription drugs around here? You've got Wall Street pumping tons and tons of money into our politics, telling politicians, hey guys, let's sign off on shipping a bunch of jobs overseas. And is it any wonder we've seen upstate New York decimated with job losses over the last generation, while Wall Street is profiting, taking those profits and buying more politicians? The system is completely rigged. The economy is rigged against working people, and our politics are rigged against working people, and it's all rigged in favor of the big money and special interests. When I worked in the United States Senate, one of the things I was most proud of doing, and I think was one of the most important things, was I wrote and worked on a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. That was one of the worst decisions in the history of this country, and it's the money in politics that it opened up is the root of all evil. When I launched this campaign, I made a very principled decision that I would not accept a single penny of corporate PAC money. And I'm the only candidate in this race from either side of the aisle who has never taken a penny of corporate PAC money, and I never will, because I'm going to Washington to work for you, not the special interests. I've been endorsed by End Citizens United, which is the leading group in this country that's trying to get dark money and special interests out of our politics. And I'm really proud of the fact that instead of taking corporate PAC money and instead of cutting myself a check for 6 figures, which a lot of families across this district would find astounding, the vast majority of our contributions are $50 or less, and most of our contributions are $25 or less. I'm running a campaign that's grassroots, it's by working folks, it's for working folks. And when those votes come down and there's a choice between the neighborhood that I grew up in or the Wall Street special interests, that's not going to be a hard decision for me.
So I share a concern that the reason we are in so many ways where we are in our country today is the involvement of money in politics. The NRA is obviously the clearest example. The fact that we have children shot in their classrooms, we cannot pass an assault weapons ban, is simply a result of that. The fact that we've never been able to cap the cost of insulin, it's a result of pharma's involvement in politics. There's no question in my mind that we need both a removal from corporate money in all forms from politics, but also a lifetime lobbying ban, stopping the revolving door, exactly, stopping the career opportunity of, oh, after this politics thing, if that doesn't work out, here's another revenue opportunity for you. But I'm also very, very open about something else. I have not closed the door on taking corporate PAC money on this campaign, and I'm gonna tell you exactly why not. Here are some of the things that are on the line right now. The right to choose. Our ability to exist safely, to go to the supermarket, our children's ability to go to school, the future of our climate. We need to win seats like this to protect those things. And our GOP opponent is funded substantially by corporate PACs and dark money. This is not something that I will fight, and I will fight on behalf of all of you and all of this district with one hand tied behind my back. If a corporate actor came to me and said, I feel strongly that the 19th be represented by a representative who is pro-choice, pro-community, pro-family, pro the protection of this world for our children, and I'd like to give you money through our corporate PAC, I would do my due diligence to make sure that that wasn't a bad actor or an election denier, and then I would take that money to fund this campaign and beat Mark Molinaro. That's my strategic decision. I'm crystal clear and very open about it. I also think we need to recognize that corporate influence is involved in many ways beyond PACs. Corporate influence comes through significant amounts of any candidate's filing coming from a single company, a company that has a lobbying arm. Coming from big tech companies. We are each responsible for every single dollar that funds our campaign. My opponent just alluded to the fact that I put some of my own money into this. I gotta be honest with you. If I'm gonna go to all of you and everyone else out there and say, help me fund my race, and I'm not willing to put my own money into that, how much confidence do I have in my campaign? I'm willing to put my own skin in the game, but I am also not willing to fight with a hand or two hands tied behind my back for the future of our children and our climate against an opponent who is so substantially funded by corporate and dark money at this point. If in Congress, I would fight for significant campaign finance reforms in addition to a lifetime ban on lobbying, in addition to term limits.
Yes, definitely. We want to encourage you to talk.
Yeah, I think this is actually a real point of contrast. Jamie, I agree on the policy thing. We have differences in how we approach the job, but this is something that's fundamental. So I gotta tell you, so first of all, good. I mean, I get the point. Invest in your own campaign. $100,000 is an amount of money that I think a lot of families in this district look at with raised eyebrows. But that aside, I am sick and tired of the argument that we either need to do the right thing or win. It's a false choice to say that you have to buy into the corruption and open the door to the corporate PAC money, or else you're going to lose. I believe we can run a campaign where the majority of contributions are $25 or less, the vast majority are $50 or less, and there's not a single penny of corporate PAC money, and win. And I believe that because we're doing it. We've raised over $1.2 million since launching this campaign in November. That's more money than any Democrat running for Congress in all of upstate New York, including all of the incumbents during that period. The support we're getting isn't from corporate PACs, it's from labor unions, workers. The United Auto Workers has endorsed us, the Nurses Union has endorsed this campaign, the communication workers have endorsed this campaign, the laborers have endorsed this campaign, the painters have endorsed this campaign. Choice between workers and corporate PACs, not a tough choice for me. And I also don't think it's a choice between winning or losing. And you know how I know? You know who else didn't take corporate PAC money and won? Antonio Delgado. You know who else didn't take corporate PAC money and won? Anthony Brindisi. You know who else isn't taking any corporate PAC money and is going to win against Mark Molinaro, who's taking a boatload of corporate PAC money? Pat Ryan. So this notion that we have to choose between swimming in the cesspool or drowning in our elections, I think is a false choice. And I'm on one side of it, and I think Jake is on the other.
Anthony, we have a follow-up. Yeah.
Wait, could I get to you if you want to rebut to the rebuttal, and then afterwards,
I don't think that either Josh or I wants to spend the rest of the day on this.
no,
but
we're not going to.
or we can. So, I think I've been crystal clear what I will stand for in Congress. I've also been crystal clear about the moment in our country where I think that we need to put in this election, 2022, in the moment when the first of possibly a series of rights has just been overturned by our court and could be controlled by the legislative branch. We need the tools available. I also, and I'm very hesitant to make this a back and forth, but I also need to point out that my two opponents are able to raise at a higher limit than I am. And they both appear to have a number of donors that they were able to go back to and say, oh, you know that old $5,900 limit? Well, only for the two of us, but not for our third opponent. Now you can give me another $2,900 and have an awful lot of donors who were able to fund them at $8,700 each. That's a lot of money. The reality is, I have to raise it a lower limit because of a whole twisted piece of New York State redistricting and campaign finance. So there's going to be criticism for my decision to put my own money in. My money that I earned building a business that took on Wall Street for working parents, that is paid by retainers from financial services companies that come to my company to say, how can we put in place programs that better support working parents? I see this as a commitment to the 19th Congressional District, as a commitment to the working families in the 19th Congressional District that I will advocate for in the same way that I have advocated for working parents for my entire career. And to the fact, the reality is my two opponents are able to raise $8,700 per individual while I am capped at $5,900. So let's just make sure that if we're going to make an argument about level playing fields, we're all committing to the same level playing field.
This is my new best friend, Sal. Sal, I want you to introduce yourself, and then I'm going to say something. And then you ask a question.
Hi, I'm Sal.
That's full name.
Okay, I'm Salvatore Catone, and I'm from Stanford. I'm also a student at American University in DC.
1 second now. Sal is also the newest member of the Delaware County Democratic Committee of the
Thank you. But Josh, I wanted to ask you personally, you're saying that you're not taking like any corporate PAC money, which is fantastic. I love that personally. I'm just gonna also say I was the intern for Vanessa Fagins Turner, who was running in New York's 22nd, and it ran a very progressive platform. But I'm just wondering, like, you're saying you're not taking corporate PAC money, but does that also include not taking money from big tech or any other corporate influence, not regarding just PACs, like any other corporate entity?
Yeah, the answer is yes. I'm taking money, I'm supporting this campaign by individuals, not corporations, and contrary to what Citizens United said, I don't think corporations are people. So I'm accepting money from people. There's one exception to that, which I've talked about. I'm happy to accept support from labor unions because they built the middle class in this country and they need a fighter in DC now more than ever. We've seen the middle class erode over the last generation, and I don't think it's a coincidence that the union movement has also been attacked and eroded over that period of time. So the contributions to our campaign are from individuals. They're not from LLCs, they're not from corporations, they're not from trade associations, they're from individuals, and they're from labor unions. So, yeah. It's a good, and by the way, thank you for joining the committee at this really important time. We need more young folks stepping up, so thanks for doing it.
I kind of drafted him, but that's the way it is.
My name's Ted Hayek. This is kind of a follow-up question also. It's about tactics. So you both mentioned that we're in a time of change. There's a lot of earth-shattering kinds of things happening around pollution, climate change, around voting rights, around gun control. I was very discouraged and upset a couple of years ago when Jen Metzger got outmaneuvered. Okay. Jen Metzger had proved herself as a very effective representative for the interests of other people, and yet got outmaneuvered by what I think were entrenched, partisan local politicians. So my tactical question is, you're both very strong candidates, and I wouldn't have trouble voting for either of you personally, but you need to get elected. So, do you have a strategy, or what would you consider the strategy to outmaneuver the entrenched Republicans in an election year that generally goes for the party not in power?
So I'm happy to talk about this question. Has everybody met Rick here? Rick is with actually Mark Molinaro's campaign. He's been following me around. And so I want everybody to treat Rick with the decency and respect that we all deserve, even though he's working with Molinaro. Rick and I are getting to know each other because he's been following me around with this camcorder. Which I take as a compliment. Thanks, Mark, for sending your guy and following us around. I appreciate it. Well, I won't say that part on tape. So I say that the trade secrets of how we're going to win this thing. I'm not going to do it with Rick here on the camera. Sorry, Mark. Sorry, man. But give this guy a raise, Mark. He's doing a great job. He came out the other night, he chased me into the parking lot, put the camcorder literally right in my face, asked me how I think Joe Biden's doing, all the hard-hitting questions. So Mark, I know you're listening, I know you're gonna watch this late tonight. Give Rick a raise, he deserves it. He's drinking, what are you drinking? Can I take this? Mark, your guy's drinking, literally, he's drinking something called liquid death, man, so.
It's a 10% of profits go to reducing aluminum and reducing plastic pollution.
Where's it made? All right. That was the best defense of a drink called liquid death we're gonna hear on this campaign. So no, look. Here's the thing. This is what I'll say. There's a lot of contrast between Molinaro and me. Number one, I was actually born in this district. He wasn't. He was born downstate in Dutchess County, or he's from downstate. I was raised in this district. I'm a really proud product of our public schools. That's a community up here. Folks who went to our public schools are part of a really special community, and I'm really proud to be part of it. He's not. I actually live in the district. He doesn't. He lives downstate in Dutchess County. I'm the only candidate who actually lives in the district. So there are some basics about being born and raised. Having this community, having raised me, I think gives me advantages in a race where I'm trying to represent this community against somebody who really doesn't have any ties to it. I think we sometimes lose sight of that. People want to be represented by somebody who grew up with them. We've talked about, look, he takes a boatload of corporate PAC money. Good for him, he's gonna be swimming in cash for the election, but I gotta tell you, there's no amount of corporate PAC money that can flood into his campaign that's gonna outweigh the desire of people in this district to be represented by somebody who side, and I think that's really going to matter. Look, the contrast in terms of our approach to issues is going to matter too. He's voted against marriage equality multiple times. I believe love is love and marriage equality should be in the Constitution. He's anti-choice. I think what we just saw with Roe v. Wade being overturned is one of the scariest, worst decisions, and I believe that a woman's healthcare decisions are hers to make, not Mark Molinaro's. He's endorsed by the National Rifle Association, in part because he voted to allow domestic abusers to have guns. I worked as counsel on the Senate Judiciary Committee after Sandy Hook, and one of the things we did, and I will continue to fight for, is to keep guns out of the hands of domestic abusers. And then look, the general election here, this is going to be about the economy. And working folks are really struggling to get by. Mark Molinaro has a record. During his tenure in Dutchess County, footnote and reminder, not in the district, he doubled the debt. He took office, it was $107 million in debt. As of last year, the auditor there had it at about $214. What's he spending the money on? Well, we found out this morning, if you haven't read the papers, read the papers this morning, spending $1,400, $1,300 on a luxury SUV to drive around town. An SUV that costs more than rent for most folks. Doubling the debt, forcing the taxpayers to pay for it, buying a luxury SUV for yourself, and by the way, repeatedly giving himself raises on the taxpayer dime. At a time when I'm going to be talking about lowering the cost of prescription drugs for seniors who are trying to get by, something everybody in Mark Molinaro's party voted against. Restoring the child tax credit, putting $300 a month back in the pockets of working families, something everybody in Mark Molinaro's party voted against. Closing the carried interest loophole and closing all the loopholes that hedge fund managers and investment bankers are using to line their own pockets at the expense of yours. Something all of Mark Molinaro's party voted against. I've already started sending letters and pressing on regulators not to raise utility rates, not to raise health insurance rates. Things that everybody in Mark Molinaro's party is going along for the ride for. Because by the way, those same companies are lining their pockets. So at the end of the day, in November, this is going to be an issue about contrasts between us and Molinaro, and I'm really excited to have that debate with him. See you, Mark. I'll see you soon.
I think this must be my favorite part, where we each get to do like our reported into Mark's camcorder. So, contrast to Mark Molinaro, first of all. Either way, anyway, contrast to Mark. So, let's talk about location. Location is a candidate for location is an issue for every candidate in this race. Some of us have not spent our adult careers in New York. Some of us, Mark, live 5 miles outside the district. Some of us have a hayfield that stops 1,000 feet from the district. For those who have spent any time in the Hudson Valley and actually know the geography of where Mark lives, making this race about those 5 miles he lives outside of the district, or that he didn't grow up and isn't part of this community. I've lived alongside Mark Molinaro for 10 years. He is deeply, deeply considered part of the Hudson Valley community. His family spans Ulster and Columbia. He lives 5 miles. We are not going to win this thing on those 5 miles. Here are 2 places where we're going to win it. And I can say this on camera because these aren't surprise, sneaky tactics. They're facts. You do not win this district I am really sorry, thanks to our special master on Democratic turnout. We got a district with a Republican registration margin. If every single person shows up and every single person votes their party registration, guess who wins? Mark Molinaro. Call the special master, file your complaints. That's the way it is. So we need a true path to crossover to make sure that we are represented by a pro-people, pro-choice, pro-communities, pro-families, pro-middle-class jobs, pro-labor vote. And there are two ways why my campaign is very uniquely positioned to do that. Number one, I don't know if any of you have seen our first campaign ad, but it was released last week. And it shares my personal story of abortion as healthcare. You know, I'll go out and see it, but in summary, I'm alive because of abortion as healthcare. It is my decision to make. I made a decision that was the right thing for my life and my family's lives. It's my business. It's every woman's choice. It's not Mark Molinaro's choice. It's not the Republicans' choice. Any further questions, let me know afterwards. But since we released that ad, where I spoke directly to my personal experience, the amount of inbound communications to our campaign, whether it's in parking lots like this, whether it's to any campaign email address, whether it's to, I think we have a phone number on our website, that have been coming flooding in from women across this district and frankly from across this country who have said, I felt that I no longer had a party. I am a parent who's felt abandoned over the past 2 years as I've been asked to participate in this economy while having my children home and kind of felt that just who was there for me. And I'm a woman who all of a sudden maybe a party that I felt represented me told me I didn't have a right to choose. I had given up on politics. I wasn't going to vote this year. There was no one representing me, and I am showing up to vote for you because you represented women in upstate New York who have a healthcare risk on the line. You stood up and you told it how it is. Based on the sheer number of women who've reached out to our campaign from across party lines, this theoretical women being willing to cross party lines this year for someone who truly represents their concern over choice is not theoretical. I can tell you because we have the data on the inbounds. Those women are raising their hands. What scares me is that many of them said, I'd give it up. I wasn't going to show up and vote. But they've said they're willing to show up and vote for a candidate who so intuitively understands the damage that was just done with the Dobbs decision. That is path to crossover, number one. Path to crossover number two is represented by my friend Eddie. Not my friend, I've actually only met Eddie twice. Let me tell you a little bit about Eddie. Eddie has a farm in this very contentious area we've just discussed, Northern Dutchess, that's right along the edge of the district. Eddie's farm is near mine. I don't know him well. We farm beef. He farms maple syrup. We were out in Ithaca a couple Mondays ago, it was like 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago, and someone said to me, Jamie, like, I know you're in the middle of this meeting, but like, I gotta tell you what's happening at the Dutchess County Legislature. I don't really care about the Dutchess County Legislature. Dutchess County is not in the district, as we mentioned. Eddie had gone to the Dutchess County Legislature, where Mark often presides. From what I understand, he was not there that evening. And he used the public comment period on one of the bills to get up and say the following. I'm a farmer. I'm a farmer who's trying to make one of these small farms we just alluded to work in upstate New York. A farmer who's been begging for policy changes that would make it feasible for me to continue to run my farm. And then I heard that Jamie Cheney's running for Congress. And I'm here, Mark, to tell you that as a farmer, I, and everyone else I know who's in our farm community and has heard about Jamie running for Congress, we're lifelong Republicans and we're coming out to vote for her because we have physically seen her roll up her sleeves and do the work in our upstate agricultural communities. We may share a party with you, Mark, but you're a lifelong politician. All of a sudden, we have someone we have seen do the work, and we are ready to switch parties and vote for her. That is a second distinct path to crossover vote. These aren't secret tactics. This is my campaign. This is our campaign. Much of my team is here. This is what we've built. We have built a campaign that is rooted in people who want to protect the rights of this generation, of the next generation, who want to protect the rights of people who have been in this community building businesses for a decade, rolling up their sleeves, and are ready to go to Washington and roll up their sleeves for the 19th Congressional District.
We only have time for a few more questions, and I really want to open it up to the audience here. I'm going to ask you about big tech. Many people feel that our privacy and our democracy need protection from the tech industry. How will you work to protect us? Do you support the FTC lawsuit against Meta?
So I had a great conversation right before we began speaking, where we talked about the sense of corporate responsibility, and I think the specific question we were talking about was responsibility on the part of executives post-2008. Should someone who profited from families' lives being destroyed in the housing market, frankly, be allowed to go free and not suffer consequences? I believe that people, leaders, companies need to be held responsible. I believe there are too many legal layers in our society as a whole, in the way that our economy is structured, that a company like Meta can say, we'll take the profits, but we won't take the responsibility. As many of you probably know, anyone can write a news story, anywhere on the internet, effectively make up a fact. It can be posted in the Facebook news feed, and after 100 people have seen it scrolled through there, people are no longer checking whether that's a true fact. And the platform that is allowing that to be spread is not being held responsible. Neither are the executives. I believe that at every single layer, and this goes from financial services executives who I have spent my career sitting down with and saying, you need to be held accountable for how you treat workers, or big tech, or big oil, or big ag, or frankly, small business. People who profit and lead our organizations do need to be held responsible. I think that big tech particularly is concerning right now because it is a platform where rumors quickly become reality and are defining our society. But I don't think it should be singled out. I think the statement I'm ready to make is that companies need to be responsible for their impact, whether that is impact on the environment or impact in terms of spreading false truths, and corporate executives need to be connected directly to that. There should be no ability as a leader who profits to shield yourself from the responsibility of a corporate entity. So I am, and I will say, as I say these words, I have 3 boys. They're 12, 10, and 8. And I'm gonna tell you about a 12-year-old. He's just at the edge, and he kind of has this idea that social media is out there, and it terrifies me every day. And it's like almost an everyday decision because he needs to be on the internet for some school stuff. And it's a moment of like, is he just going across that divide? I feel this so deeply. We need to protect a generation by holding Meta and every other social media company responsible, but not just the companies, the corporate leaders as well. Because the companies are shells, and they're shells in every aspect of our society. Corporate leaders need to be held accountable for the actions of their companies, and we need to take every legal step possible to do that. And again, as a parent of a 12-year-old, we need to do it immediately in the face of social media, but no less urgently than in the face of climate. So yeah, this one just hits me passionately and deeply as I try to keep my 12-year-old off those corners of the internet that I think we all know. Yes, I am fully supportive of the website, of the lawsuits.
So yeah, I think the FTC's lawsuit against whatever they're calling themselves now, Meta, is a really important step. I also think one of the things we saw when the initial complaint in that case was dismissed is that the laws we have on the books right now to hold big technology companies accountable are inadequate for the times. The last major rewrite to our internet regulations was in the early 90s. I mean, how many people had a smartphone in the early 90s? How many people had Facebook in the early 90s? Nobody. And so what we've seen are these laws that are antiquated, they haven't kept up with the times, and a lot of corporations are exploiting those. So yes, I think the FTC is doing the right thing with its lawsuit against Facebook, but I also think Congress needs to step up and give the FTC and the Justice Department, frankly, more tools. Jamie raises a good point about conspiracy theories on social media. I will say I'm the one candidate in this race who doesn't hold stock in Meta. So, you know, I think there's a big issue with social media, and we shouldn't be rewarding them with shareholder activity. One of the cases I worked on when I was a lawyer in private legal practice touched on this issue. There was a family who tragically lost their son. He was the victim of an unsolved murder in Washington, D.C. In 2016. And he had worked previously for the Democratic National Committee, and a conspiracy theory emerged positing that he, not Russia, not Trump and the Russians, but this poor kid was actually the person who got a hold of Hillary's emails and leaked them. The conspiracy theory basically said he was killed in retaliation for that. Absolutely dark and horrific, and ruined this family's life, this grieving family. And what we found, so we filed one of the first ever defamation lawsuits against the folks who were peddling these conspiracy theories, took on Twitter and other companies to try to get them to take some of this stuff down, Facebook, others. And what I learned through that practice is two things. One, these conspiracy theories are terribly scary. This one about Hillary's emails, actually we had evidence showing that it was discussed in the West Wing in the early days of the Trump administration. So this stuff goes, it's not just the darkest corners of the internet, it's in the highest levels of power. And it preys on people, and the misinformation preys on folks and takes hold. But the other thing that I learned that's also really important is that the legal tools we have available today, the defamation laws and the other legal tools we have available to counteract these conspiracies and this misinformation, we saw it around COVID as well, are inadequate. So yes, I agree with federal agencies and law enforcement trying to crack down on this. I also think we have to give them more tools and resources to do it effectively.
Okay, I've got a question for both of the candidates. I just spoke with our sound master. He said that he doesn't have to leave right now. So how long can you stay? Because I do believe we have some more questions.
I'm happy to stay as long as I possibly can. I mean, on the other, how many? I have one.
Oh, we're gonna get to more questions. We're gonna know with our two candidates.
You, Jacqueline, and you guys want to just connect and find out what our joint team cutoff time is? We're both looking at that.
Okay.
It's so far above Josh and my pay grade as to what
Right, yeah, that's what we're gonna make sure.
But those two have it under control.
No, that's like one thing I've learned on the
Those are people getting lively now with questions, so I hate to go and cut it off.
Right.
No, I'm happy to keep going.
Yeah, happy to keep going.
This is-
Let me ask my question.
So, all right, so,
Let me ask my question.
my good friend Kim is jumping over a couple of other people, but several people want to ask questions.
Because, yes, and
Kim,
we'll
where
make
are you
sure we
from?
have
Who are you? Where are you
time.
from?
My name is Kim Benetta. I'm the Walton Democratic Chair. And this question is, you want to give me my little card? Is not just for you, but it's for everybody here, because we're going to need your help to get out the vote. According to a Washington Post poll released yesterday, 74% of Republicans who say abortion should be illegal say they will definitely vote, compared to 62% of Democrats who say abortion should be legal, an 11-point difference. The question is, how can we get Democrats to vote? And that's what we see, and that's why we need all your help for get out the vote efforts for whoever wins. Historically, in Delaware County, Republicans turn out to vote, Democrats don't. We need to change that if we're going to have any success. Thank you.
thank you for opening this up to all of us, because this is the biggest challenge, and I do think there's an element of teamwork. So something I would ask any candidate that you're thinking about voting for is how many doors they've knocked for other candidates, how many lawn signs they have hammered in, how many phone calls they've made, how many local races they have worked on, because all politics is local. We all know that. So I mean, this room is the epitome of that. But it is going to be the ultimate teamwork, the ultimate willingness of everyone up and down the ticket to do the literal rolling up of their sleeves, because this is not a story of some candidates standing up and making grandiose statements that may inspire people to come out, and another group doing the work of reaching out to every single voter, particularly in this special where we need to say things to people that are complicated. So here's the deal, here's the day you have to get your absentee ballot by, and here's when early voting starts, and you may very well, you know where you're going to be on August 23rd. It's a communications lift that is substantial. So I very much got my start in politics, if you will, as very, very much a worker bee. I tended to focus on the physical things that I could do with my children. So when I would be complaining about Trump at our kitchen table, we could say, you know what, we knocked on 10 doors today, and frankly, my kids were at the time very little. Even a 4-year-old can count 1, 2, 3, 4, and that means a lot more to them. So I happen to have a background that is very grounded in number of voter connections. It also means that I think like many people in this room, because you do the hard work, how hard every single one of those voter connections is to make. Those 10 doors in an area like this, that takes 3 hours sometimes. Specifically on my campaign, we've tried to think very directly around the voters who are most motivated and the voters who are going to have the largest barrier, given the timing of this race. We have identified working parents, for those of you who aren't up to school on camp, aren't up to speed on camp and school schedules. Virtually every camp in this area finishes right around the day of our election, and schools have not started yet. It is the 2 weeks of the year that if you have children and you're trying to get your job done, you're already stretched in a million directions. So we've started a text-based chain to parents, school district-based across each of our counties. So people are getting a text from someone within their school district saying, we know that you're a registered Democrat. We know this is a crazy time of year. Remember that there's a primary election. Here are the key dates. And we're doing that specifically because we've identified that that's a group that is likely to be motivated to turn out on the issues this year. There's so many, but particularly on the issue that you alluded to around choice, and likely to have a significant barrier in terms of timing. And we're very willing to share those tools with every other campaign. The other thing that we're working really actively to do, and again, before I sort of jump up and take credit, I'm gonna guess that Josh's team is as well. I know that we're coordinating with every single state and assembly race to be carrying for each other, so that any one point of voter outreach is not a point of voter outreach for our campaign, it's a point of voter outreach for the assembly campaign and the Senate campaign. So we're working hard to be as efficient and effective as we can across the district, but particularly to think about barriers and about those who might be most motivated but have the biggest barriers, and how we can reach out directly to them. That said, we are all open to all ideas. If you have something you are starting to see working in terms of opening up dialogue, let us know. We will put our campaign resources to executing it, because this is an area in which a rising tide lifts all ships. At the end of the day, this needs to be a Democratic seat, and we need turnout to win, so any way we can work together to do that is phenomenal.
The poll results tell me one thing, which syncs with my intuition from talking to folks across the district. We've got to talk to folks and have a plan for the challenges they're having at their kitchen table. Like, who's the best? Oh, there you go. Hi. So we need to, in November, we need to be talking to folks about the issues they're talking about at their kitchen tables, And I see this election less about the general election, less about do you want a Democrat, do you want a Republican, do you want Team Red, do you want Team Blue? It's a choice between change or the status quo. And the status quo hasn't been working very well across upstate New York for the last generation, and really across the country in a lot of ways. We've seen in the course of a generation a lot of job loss here. We've seen the opioid epidemic take hold. We've seen poverty rates increase. We've seen at the same time a situation now where the top 1% in this country have more wealth than the entire middle class combined. 90% of the gains in this economy are going to just 10% of people at the very top. None of that, those challenges folks are facing, those difficult conversations seniors on fixed incomes are having between their groceries or prescription drugs, none of that is, or at least shouldn't be, hyper-partisan. Those are just families, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, those are the conversations you're having at the kitchen table. And so what this election is about in November is, do you want more of the same? Do you want somebody who's been in office for the last 30 years, who's done nothing but run for office for decades? Or do you want change and new voices? And whether it's Jamie or me, we're both offering new voices and new leadership. We as a country have become so terribly divided. Too many people are looking at their political opponents as if they were their enemies. We've got to get back to a place where recognizing we all have way more in common than what divides us, and that those conversations at the kitchen table, whether you're having them in my family where my parents are both Republicans, my sister is very far off to the left, and we have those conversations with a family with different political backgrounds. Folks are having those conversations across upstate New York. And so a big part of November is going to be making this race about those common concerns and a choice between whether you want the status quo, which is on the table for you, or whether you want somebody like us who is new to politics and a new voice and new leadership.
To subscribe, advertise, or sponsor programming, call 607-464-4009.